Oh, hi. Really looking forward to talking about this. It's sort of a bit of a side interest from my PhD. So I would like to make it clear I'm not saying I'm an absolute expert in transcription or artificial intelligence or anything like that. What I have done is I've used automated transcription throughout my PhD, which I started in 2018, and I've been sharing my experiences of using it and particularly thinking about the practical and ethical issues and different considerations around using it for research purposes. My PhD is similar in ways, so I look at how technology can be used in planning and decision-making situations. And looking around the kind of ethical issues around that. So there are some crossovers in terms of maybe some of the ethical principles of using technology. Today I'm going to talk for half an hour-ish, and then we can open it up into a bit of a discussion and Q&A, which I'm looking forward to. I'm going to first kind of, again, assuming no prior knowledge about automated transcription, so apologies if I'm saying some things that people already know, but what is automated transcription? How does it work? What is there surrounding this kind of automated versus manual transcription debate? What are the best transcription tools that are commercially available at the moment? Why did I specifically choose to use Otter AI? And here I would just like to say I've written blog posts about Otter AI before, and I'm not affiliated or sponsored by them in any way. So just like to make that clear before I start talking about it. You know, they're not behind telling me what to say. What can you do with it? So I'm going to focus specifically on using it in a research context, using it for qualitative interviews. But I won't be using qualitative interviews as the example, obviously. I will be using some publicly available seminars that I went to, which were recorded. And I'll talk about some of the key features and some of the maybe practical issues and considerations around that. And then finally, I'll talk about some of the more ethical things that you can think about. So, you know, around access, transparency, privacy and security issues. So there are obviously lots of benefits to manually transcribing things. My background is in qualitative research, and then I've kind of used both qualitative and quantitative methods throughout my whole research career so far. I'm a mixed methods researcher, so I do see the benefits of lots of different approaches. And I know from, you know, manually transcribing things is particularly important for gaining meaning from the transcript and reading it and getting a feel for your research and your research participants, particularly in terms of things like emotions and that sort of thing. But it can be extremely time consuming. I think for my master's dissertation, I transcribed maybe 20 or so interviews, and it can take, you know, weeks to do that. And it's very repetitive. And when you're transcribing, you know, it can be difficult to sort of highlight things because you're focusing on typing and you might have to go back or repeat things, and it can just take a very long time, and it can also be quite costly, particularly for institutions where they might, like the CCRI, where, you know, you do a lot of qualitative interviewing within that institute, and you might be paying a significant amount of money every year for outsourcing that transcription costs. So automated transcription software is really, really rapidly developing, and it's being used increasingly, you know, in journalism, in education, and it does offer a huge potential to make that research task a bit easier, shall we say, saving time, saving money, and perhaps increasing accuracy in some situations, which I'll discuss further on. So what it is it does offer an almost entirely automatic solution, which I'd like to say, which helps people convert audio to written text. And just to be really clear, I don't think that it's an absolute replacement for human input in transcription, more of a supplement to what we already do. So don't see it as a magic solution to transcription, that you're going to feed in the audio and you're going to magically have everything ready in a transcript that doesn't need editing and never needs looking at until you're analysing it. It does require some input throughout the process, ideally from somebody who knows a bit about the background to why that interview is happening. And obviously there are lots of sort of practical and ethical considerations, and these do change depending on the area of research, on the researcher and their experience, on the people that you're talking to and the nature of the research encounter. You know, if you're wanting to do an ethnomethodology with people maybe as well as interviews, then having something automatically transcribed might not help with that. So, you know, it isn't going to be an automatic quick fix in every situation, and I am aware of that. And there are also going to be different institutional barriers depending on, you know, the university you're at or the business that you're working in. And I just wanted to kind of summarize this manual versus automated debate, which I see a lot on social media and have a lot of conversations with people. There are pros and cons with both, relating to all these different things: time and money, accessibility, whether or not you need ethical approval and informed consent, whether or not people have the right skills or, you know, the right confidence to engage, not just the researchers, but the participants, how trustworthy is the software you're using, and so forth. And these are all things I'll talk about throughout this presentation. And I will come back to this later on, because I perhaps do think that discussing it as a one or the other isn't very helpful, which I'll come back to later on. So how does it work? It is something called, or it uses artificial intelligence and machine learning. Again, I'm not an expert in these areas, and I wouldn't say I'm a data scientist. My background is in the social sciences. I'm just very interested in the ethical implications of using these technologies. They're both artificial intelligence and machine learning are areas related to data science. Specifically, apps like Otter AI and other automated transcription software use something called natural language processing, which is basically how machines process what we're saying and make sense of that language in a way that's familiar and valuable to us. So it's used absolutely everywhere: marketing, advertising. If you've got a personal assistant, I've got an OK Google with a little screen in my flat that I kind of tell to turn on the radio. That uses natural language processing. Interview filters, for example, identifying spam. A lot of job recruitment sites use it to sort of highlight skills in people who are applying. It's used a lot in health at the NHS, for example, identifying diseases. Used all over social media. So it really is used everywhere. And it's basically a field of artificial intelligence that gives computers the ability to read, understand, and derive meaning from human languages. And if you were interested in natural language processing, like I am, I'm also using it to analyse my qualitative interviews in my work. Towards Data Science is a really good website to start with anything like this, because they do tend to explain it to quite a lay audience before they get into the more technical stuff. And again, it's important to recognise, I won't go into it in too much depth here, but there is a lot of controversy around natural language processing, particularly when it's used for health data and that sort of thing. So I think there was one situation that made the news where through natural language processing, they were able to predict that people had diseases when they themselves wouldn't have known. So there are a lot of perhaps more tricky issues just depending on the type of data that you're working with. And obviously a lot of the time, you know, when you're doing qualitative interviewing, you may or may not be more or less concerned about these things. So what are the best available tools on the market at the moment? There are a lot of them, and there are a lot of very helpful websites. So I won't go into a lot of detail here. Tech Radar is really, really good. I always use that and just search sort of, you know, what are the best automated transcription apps in 2021, or sometimes they'll call it dictation software, speech to text software, which is all pretty much the same thing. There's no perfect app, I don't think, and some services are really quite expensive depending on the package that you get. So a lot of the time in Tech Radar, for example, Dragon and Dragon Professional, they're rated right at the top, very high quality, really excellent voice recognition, syncs very well with the software on your desktop. But there are some limited functions with their app. And I think I chose to use Otter AI just because I find the interface very accessible. You can use it on your mobile phone. I really like the fact how mobile it is. So I am sharing my experiences using Otter AI as an example, because I haven't, I've chosen to pay. I think I pay $4.99 a month with their higher education discount, and that's just a few pounds. Yeah, I've just decided to use that throughout my PhD. So I'm using it as an example. Why did I choose it? Basically, as I said before, it's really, really good to use kind of live and on the go transcription. So you have different options for it. You can load in a pre-recorded transcript, or you can just transcribe as you're talking. And it's really useful, I find, in an interview situation, have the transcript just going on in the background, so it transcribes as you're talking, and that can be quite reassuring in an interview. And it's really useful if you're attending a webinar as well, because if you want to ask a question or you want to bring up something that somebody said earlier on in the interview or the seminar, you can just scroll back in the transcript or search for that keyword and go, yeah, and remind yourself. Or while you're talking, you can highlight text. Quite often I'll do that and add a note if I'm doing an interview with somebody. So I just find it a bit reassuring, and it's quite useful to use those features. So it is marketed specifically for meetings, interviews, taking notes in lectures and that kind of thing. And as I said before, it has a really accessible interface. I just really like it. I think it's very friendly to use. It automatically generates a time-stamped transcript, which is quite useful. I think I originally thought that was really attractive because I was doing walking interviews outside with people and GPS tracking them kind of earlier along in my PhD. So I used it because actually having the timestamp to know where we were and what someone was saying was quite important to me. Obviously, there are things like the background noise if you're walking around, that could be an issue. And then actually, as my PhD went on and COVID happened, I never did those walking interviews, but maybe one day. You can edit it really, really easily. So all in the desktop app or the mobile phone app, you can just edit whilst listening to the transcript, and it will highlight the words as you're going through, as I'll show in a minute. You can summarize your interviews or your webinar recordings. They'll give you keywords, and you can also visualize them as a word cloud, which I think is quite nice. So the word gets bigger as the frequency of the word in the transcript increases. You can integrate photos really nicely in the transcript. So if you're listening to a webinar and you see a slide that you really like or you want to remember, and you're recording it on the app, you just snap a photo of the screen and you'll see exactly, the photo will be integrated when they were talking about it, if that makes sense. So that's also useful in an interview situation. Because if somebody, wants to share their screen with you or shows you something, you can snap a photo and you'll remember that for later on. You can export it to lots of different formats as well. So text files, MP3 for further analysis. And then there are some other features which, so I used to use the free package for a while, and then I decided to start paying for it monthly. You get a 50%, I think, higher education discount. So I just get an individual subscription. And it's, $4.99 a month. So whatever that is in pounds, it's not very much. And then if you're a PhD student, if you get a research allowance, I think a lot of the time you can get that paid through there. They do have lots of other really crazy features for collaborative working, which I haven't tried. And I wanted to mention their Otter Assistant. So one of their newest features that I saw on Twitter a few weeks ago. Basically, you can get Otter AI to sign into a Zoom webinar without you actually being there. It will record it and it will take notes and that kind of thing without you being there at all, which to me is just mad. So you can do that as well. It's called Otter Assistant if you want to read about it. So I'm going to kind of give a bit of a demonstration before I go into talking about some of the ethical issues. I've taken some screenshots from my own kind of Otter desktop app, and I'm using some webinars that were kind of publicly available that I went to earlier in the year. to kind of show what it can do. And just to be clear, these are entirely unedited. So this is kind of what it looks like when you do it. So there are small errors and that kind of thing, which you'll see. So on the left-hand side here is just sort of what it looks like when you see all of your recorded transcripts. So you've got a title, you've got the length of time, you've got how many photos you took. You can either import audio or video. So if it's pre-recorded, you can do it there, or you can just record it in real time. What's quite useful is you can search within all the recordings. So if you want to say, oh, I want to find this webinar that I went to earlier in the year, or this interview I did with this person, you can just search in for a keyword that you know might be in there. And then you've also got, when you actually click on the transcript, obviously you've got the title, you've got some summary keywords, so it's scanned through the whole transcript and it will tell you the words that are most frequently mentioned throughout it. And what it does is it automatically removes things called stop words. So they're common English words like and, if, but. So, you know, obviously they'd be right up there in terms of frequency, but it does remove those for you. So what you are seeing is something that can be quite reflective of what's actually being spoken about. So here, you know, I was in a webinar about engaging people in planning, because that's what I do for my PhD. So you've got keywords there like, you know, planning, local authorities, consultation, local government, that sort of thing. You can see all the photos that you took during the interview or the webinar there as well. So you see a summary at the top, and then they're also integrated throughout the text where you took them. And then you've got speaker labels. So this is one thing that sometimes it doesn't get absolutely correct, but it's fine. Is it will recognize different voices, and when it doesn't get them correct, it's usually because somebody's interrupted another person. So if you've got lots of people talking at once, it can struggle to kind of pull that apart coherently. So as I mentioned earlier, it does require human input, I think, throughout the process. So it's important not to think that it's going to be absolutely perfect first time and expect something that's very perfect. I've had lots of people say to me, oh, I don't actually think it saves me time in the long run, or, oh, I saw the transcript and it just looked really messy. That might be the case. It might be something that you're unfamiliar with, especially if you've done manual transcription a lot so far. But the key point is, it is a learning process. The more you use it, the more you'll learn to pick up on these things, which I'll kind of explain in a bit as well. So this on the, here we've got where you can search for keywords within the whole transcript, so you can perform quite basic or more complex search queries. So in this recording, this webinar that I attended about planning and engagement, I just searched for the word trust, for example, because I know that trust is quite important when you're engaging people in decision making. And it will just show you where that comes up throughout the transcript and different variations of that word, trusting, trusted, which can be quite useful if you want to really quickly just see, oh, I wonder if this was, mentioned quite a lot in here. So you can search for topics of interest. And then there, I'm just showing kind of what it looks like when the photos are integrated in that transcript. So they go exactly where people talk about it. And this sort of shows, what I'm meaning about the, you do need to edit it. It will often give you really big chunks of dialogue. It doesn't break it down into paragraphs. Sometimes it does, sometimes you'll get huge, long paragraphs. So you can basically, when you have finished recording and you press stop, it will have a bit of a think, it'll assign the speakers, and you can click on it and you can click edit. When you're editing, you can just, normally delete words, retype them. And what's really useful is what I do, I play the audio recording while I'm doing it. So here, this first bit of highlight, I've just highlighted that to show you, you can click, you can share that quote, you can copy it, you can add a photo, you can highlight it, and it will show you a summary of those highlights at the top. And then where the word developers is highlighted, that's where it literally highlights each word as it's going through while the person is talking. So that's really useful to pick up where it might have misheard something. So for example, I go to a lot of like environmental webinars and that sort of thing, where I talk to people about the environment. And if people talk about the organization DEFRA, Sometimes it will recognize it as DEFRA, or sometimes it will say death, which is not what you want in your transcript. So it's useful for kind of going through and, you know, the more you do that, you see the word death randomly, you think, okay, that's probably going to be DEFRA because I know the context of this conversation. So the more you do it and the more you expect things like that to happen, the easier it gets to edit it. So it might be a bit weird the first few times, but you really do get the swing of it. Same with when you've got a huge chunk of text, you can kind of think, okay, I'm pretty sure somebody must have just interrupted, it must have not picked up the new speaker as quickly, so you know to insert a paragraph break there. Quite often it will also merge the last sentence of one paragraph with the first sentence of the next paragraph, or vice versa, which might sound a bit confusing, but as you know, the more you use it, the clearer these things become. Just very quickly as well, this is, you've got lots of keyboard shortcuts which are really useful for editing. You can slow down or speed up the audio, you can rewind, play and pause, insert a paragraph break, and so forth. You can undo and redo actions that you've done if you've deleted something by accident maybe. And then I mentioned when you can highlight things throughout the text. So I'll either do this when I'm editing and I'll add comments, or I'll do this while I'm actually talking to somebody. And then it will just show you right at the top, you can view all the things that you've highlighted in that transcript just at once, which is really useful. And if you click on the quote, it will take you to where it is in the transcript. And this is what the kind of little summaries that it does. So it has a summary of keywords in terms of the frequency in the transcript. And it also gives you speaker, the length of time that speakers have been speaking for throughout the interview or the webinar, which I think is quite interesting. Maybe you could compare male and female, or, you know, different people who were present in that group due to, you know, how much time they took speaking. And I think the word cloud's quite nice. There are better ways to do word clouds. They're not very sophisticated ways of analysing things, but I think they're a really nice, quick, snappy way to show what are the core themes in here. So this webinar about engagement, community engagement, you've got, yeah, people engage, conversations, local authorities, housing. And if you've got, I think, here, you can kind of, this is just a few examples of how you could compare them quite quickly. You can see very quickly that these are about different things. So it can save a lot of time because you can just compare all the summaries of all of your interviews, for example. And you know, one's very clearly about cartography and citizen mapping, the next one's about engagement and planning, and the last one's about geographic information systems and landscape. So it's really useful, you know, especially if you're working with others in a team, you can just quickly send some summaries and that really helps. So I'm just maybe speed through the next bits because I feel like I'm may talk for a bit too long, but we'll see how it goes. As I said before, human input is just really, really key. I really wanted to emphasize this. It's really not a replacement, this automation. The human language is really messy, and therefore so is the transcript. It is a verbatim transcription. So if you expect that, and the more you become familiar with it, the easier it does become to edit it and make sense of what you're getting. So the punctuation and flow of the conversation can be really tricky to get the hang of, as I kind of showed, you know, maybe random full stops, random capitalization, merging paragraphs or breaking up paragraphs. Sometimes it will break up a paragraph. If somebody pauses, it will think that, you know, they're starting a new topic, or they might put a full stop there. So the more you learn to kind of recognize when these things are happening, the easier it just becomes to edit it. I've done analysis on some things where I actually, you know, haven't edited it that thoroughly at all, and it's absolutely fine. You can read through, and once you know pragmatically that these things are possible, you know, going to happen, it becomes a little bit less intimidating, because I think, you know, sometimes you can look at the transcript and go, oh my God, what is this? It makes no sense, when actually it does. Also, algorithms might not know specialized words, so abbreviations, for example, I don't know, one that it never gets with me is the Farming and Wildlife Advisory Group, which is FLAG, but it says flag. So I just know in the transcript, whenever it says flag, it's probably talking about that group. You can also teach your Otter AI to remember abbreviations like that. I've tried it with a few things, but honestly, I just find it easier to just assume that if it's got something like death or flag, that it's going to be one of those abbreviations. And also, obviously, language is very complex. You've got lots of, terms and colloquialisms and all sorts of things, and obviously different languages other than English, which I know Otter AI only works with English at the moment, but it is, developing. I think Dragon works with different languages, but obviously that is a huge consideration because you can be potentially leaving out somebody just simply based on the fact that they don't have perfect English or missing things that they're saying because of that. And then you would need to listen back through and possibly correct more errors than if that person was speaking in very clear English. There's something called Human in the Loop AI, which I will come back to. I won't go into it here because it maybe is a bit more relevant later on, but it's basically a whole area of thinking where the human plays a huge role in providing feedback and evaluating the way that algorithms are processing. So it's just to really emphasize that, you absolutely need to be present and ideally an expert or have knowledge in the area in which you're conducting this interview or knowledge of the webinar that you're trying to transcribe and summarize. If you're analyzing an interview and you don't know about the background, you might really struggle to, if you're passing it on to somebody else to analyze and transcribe, for example, might struggle a bit there. So going on to more of this privacy, security and ethical considerations now. We've talked about some of the more practical aspects of using the app. So obviously, I'm funded by the Economic and Social Research Council, and my PhD is, and they say that ethical considerations should be reviewed regularly, which includes data protection, privacy and security, and the location and safe storage of personal information on third-party servers. So some commercially available transcription services, like those provided by Otter AI, which is a Silicon Valley company, they may transfer your data out of the European Union and European Economic Area, which is a really important consideration for GDPR, which is a regulation in EU law on data protection and privacy for individuals within the EU and EEA. However, even though personal data, so that would be your interview transcripts, might be transferred out of this area, it doesn't mean that they aren't covered by suitable privacy policies. So I would say whichever transcription software you use, do read their privacy policy. They're normally very long and over multiple different documents with multiple appendices, but do go through, and sometimes it can be easier to read it if you look first. They'll have things like, when they say services with a capital S, that means the services that they provide you. When they say the audio recording, that means the recordings that you have stored within that platform. So you could do a control find for audio recording and just look at all the things that they say about what they will do with that audio recording and the rights around that. So while the privacy notices are very, very long, there are kind of ways to skip through it. And they're all written in legal terms as well. So yes, have a strong coffee and read them. So yes, basically they will be covered by something called the Privacy Shield framework, which basically provides companies with a mechanism to comply with data protection requirements when transferring data. So for example, from countries within the European Union, obviously UK and Brexit, I'll get onto that in a minute, to the United States, for example. So I've kind of copied and pasted some. I'm happy to share these slides with people if they're interested. So I've copied and pasted some bits from Otter AI's privacy notice, because again, this is the software that I've been using. And they say, if you provide an audio recording, this may contain the personal information of third parties, so the people who you're interviewing perhaps. Before you do so, please make sure you have the necessary permissions from your co-workers, friends, or other third parties before sharing personal information or referring them to us. So always, absolutely, I'll show in a minute what I did in my research, but always get informed consent when you're using these apps. Do not assume that people, that you don't need to. Perhaps you wouldn't, you would get informed consent if you were just recording normally. Definitely you need informed consent if you're using something like Otter AI. And give them an option as well to opt out of it is quite important. So I've highlighted in green the main bit. So basically Otter AI might transfer, store and process your operations with their partners and service providers based outside of the country in which you are based. So what I was discussing on the last slide, laws in those countries might differ from the laws applicable to your country of residence. When we transfer, store and process your personal information outside of the EEA or the UK, we will ensure that the appropriate safeguards are in place to ensure an adequate level of protection. So I think that's referring to their Privacy Shield framework, which I provided links for in the slides. Another key bit is they train their artificial intelligence technology on aggregated, de-identified audio recordings. So that means they will have loads and loads and loads of audio recordings from all of their customers that are not identified to the customer. So it is your responsibility as the owner of the data to make sure that you've removed anything identifiable from the transcripts, especially if you're doing interviews. Obviously, don't name them. This is my interview with Bob. You know, make sure that you've called it something else. Only with your explicit permission will we manually review certain audio recordings to further refine our model training data. So this basically means that they will ask your explicit permission before they have a human being read or listen to the things that you've uploaded. So that might sound a bit weird, but basically it comes back to this human in the loop artificial intelligence that I mentioned earlier. At some point, it is better to improve the services if you've got a human being checking and evaluating that algorithm. So it's not all just automatic, but they do have to ask your explicit permission for that first. And that's what they say in their privacy notice. So this is just a little bit on, maybe a bit confusing. It's confused me a lot. Basically on the status of the UK and whether or not they're part of the EEA anymore and how that works with GDPR. Had a little read this morning and basically came to the fact that this little quote that I posted on, I was going to have to move my Zoom thing that's covering it. So the European Commission in a press release has said they are expected to decide on the UK's data protection and the continuation of data transfers across the channel in the coming months. Which is not very helpful, and this was posted at the beginning of June and the beginning of this month. But if you kind of want to keep up to date on this, you can search for basically the Privacy Shield and the UK and keep up to date on it in that sense. So basically when the UK left the EU, it did affect that, but it doesn't seem like there's any resolution as of yet. So this is what I've used a quote for my own research, and I know it's what others have used as well, and other organisations, and that kind of thing. So as I said before, it's absolutely key to get informed consent from your research participants. They need to know where to access the privacy notice from Otter AI if they want to. They need to know that the data might be transferred outside the EEA. So this is a quote that was put in informed consent sheets. So the audio recording of the interview, which may contain personal data, if you've shared this during the interview, might be shared with a commercially available transcription service for the purpose of transcribing the interview you share during the information you share during the interview. Occasionally, your data may be transferred outside of the EEA. However, in such cases, it will be covered by appropriate privacy policies. For example, your data may be transferred out of the EEA for the purposes of transcription, so Otter AI maybe, using a transcription service that is signed up to the Privacy Shield framework. So Otter AI is signed up to the Privacy Shield work. I've put the links in the previous slides. And if you want to copy and paste this statement, it's on my blog on a post called The Ethics of Automated Transcription. And this is what I've said in kind of more recent research interviews. So on the left-hand side here is, actually, well, left-hand side to me, I'm not sure, I can never know what people are looking at on their screens. The larger box, it's important to have something, you know, when you're doing informed consent with your interviews, what will happen to your data, the data that the participant is giving you. So you can talk about Otter AI if you're using Otter AI there, or Dragon if you're using Dragon. You know, I said the audio recording will be recorded and transcribed verbatim by professional and confidential auto transcription software. So again, if you want to kind of go back and read this again, do let me know, I can send you the slides. And then again, when they're signing the consent form, put links to the software that you're using, put links to the privacy policy maybe, if you haven't already got it in the information sheet. and make sure they explicitly agree to using Otter AI. And if they don't want to use Otter AI, they can opt out of it, and you can just record it as you perhaps would otherwise using your phone or whatever. So kind of going on to more of the ethicsy things before I will stop talking, hopefully in 5 minutes, and have some questions and a discussion about it. I think automated approaches are often a bit of a black box. So, you know, the inputs and the outputs are very clear to people, the transcript and the audio, but what happens in between is not very clear, which doesn't need to be the case. And it's important to, you know, be very clear that the interpretation of the outcomes does need a subject matter expert. So when you're reading back through and editing, it does really help if you are knowledgeable in that area, because then you know how to edit it best. And it's not just about this accuracy in editing and you know, how accurate the transcript is. There are a lot of wider ethical principles around using these technologies. So there's a whole area of research called the ethics of algorithms. I put some organizations down at the bottom of this slide that I follow on Twitter, and it's, you know, they have some really nice blog posts and stuff like that if you're interested. So there are some very core issues like bias, fairness, equality, latency, control or lack of control, trust or lack of trust, confidence, and so forth. So they're very strong principles for using artificial intelligence software and the way that they're designed, and the social and institutional context in which they happen. So they don't, you know, they can't be taken out of that context. That's not only, you know, the context that you're using them in your interviews, the context of the institution that you're operating under, and also the context in which the algorithm was written. You know, who wrote it, who's making the decisions about how it's designed, you know, what institutional frameworks are they operating under. And going back again to this human in the loop concept. So while these natural language processing technologies are very beneficial in terms of speed and ability, you know, you can go through vast amounts of data. There are challenges in terms of interpreting and communicating them to the end users. So maybe, you know, if you're analysing them for your thesis chapter or something like that, there does need to be, you know, you do need to evaluate it throughout the process. So in my PhD, in my methodology chapter, for example, I will talk about the potential limitations and the benefits around using this software. So I won't just use it and not mention it. Maybe if you're doing an undergraduate dissertation, you could just have a small paragraph, but it is important to be aware of these things and, you know, different issues and potential barriers along the line, and explain why you didn't do things or why you did do things. This was one of the blog posts. I just had to put this in. I saw this recently just because it was really, really interesting. This is from the Ada Lovelace Institute. Sorry, I just accidentally clicked next. And it was talking about the role of the arts and humanities and thinking about artificial intelligence. This is largely more about big decisions that are made using these softwares. So maybe stuff to do with health research or political decision making. But I think it's relevant for if you're using automated transcription as well, or at least I find it very interesting. And I just really like this quote. They said, perhaps the most fundamental contribution of the arts and humanities is to make vivid the fact that the development of AI is not a matter of destiny, but instead involves successive waves of highly consequential human choices. And that's the key part. So it's really important to identify the choices, to frame them in the right way, and to raise the question, who gets to make these choices and how? So these are all key things that you can think about when you're thinking about the ethics of technology in this respect. And then I always kind of go back to this blog post that I read a while ago. You know, any technology can be used to increase social justices. So particularly when you're thinking about the fact that a lot of these transcription technologies might not work with every language, that could exclude some people. How do you have those conversations? How do you tackle barriers like that? And, you know, do try and work quite actively to include people who might be included or excluded in these processes for various different reasons. You know, not everybody might be able to engage with technology in the same way, and that's always important to remember. Then very finally, going back to this slide that I had at the beginning, about this kind of manual versus automated transcription debate. And I said, I'm not quite sure if it's helpful, and I'm very happy to be challenged on that. But I think thinking of it as something separate and, you know, a dichotomy between you're transcribing something manually or doing it automated, it doesn't need to be that, you know, it doesn't need to be an either or. You can do both. So the way that I've described it throughout, I hope, throughout this presentation, you know, it is a mixture of doing things manually and doing things automated. And the automation is a really useful supplement to something that you would be doing anyway. It saves an awful lot of time and it's really beneficial in a lot of different ways. But it does need to be applied thoughtfully and carefully to the context in which you're using it, taking into consideration all of these potential social and institutional, you know, barriers there. And of course, the future will be hybrid in lots of different ways, you know, human and machine, like a film. So yeah, that's the end of my presentation. So I've gone on for a little bit longer than I'd hoped. But yeah, I have some questions. And also, if anyone wants the slides, I've got lots of reading lists if anyone is super interested.
Excellent, Caitlin. Thank you very much. That was a very comprehensive delivery for your seminar. And I see there are a number of practical questions down the side there, which I'm sure you'll be able to answer. I'm handing over to Katerina now, who will facilitate the chat and the questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Julie. I mean, there are a couple of questions that you've answered, I think, during the presentation as well. Because the first one is whether Otter is available for English language at the moment, or whether there are any other sort of languages in consideration. So I think we had an answer for that. So we'll see what they can do with it. There is the next question is, how well do the outputs integrate with the qualitative analytical tools like the NVivo or similar?
Yeah, I was doing that the other day. It's very easy. So when you're using Otter, you can just click, you know, export, and you can export the audio or you can export the text file. And then when you've got the text file, I use something called Sublime, which is quite good. It's you can Google it. It's a free text file reader, and you can also use a Microsoft Word as well. You just export it or import it, sorry, into NVivo. It's the same if you're using text mining in something like R. Or Python. It's just, you know, once you've got that text file, you can import it into any text analysis software. So it's really easy and it integrates really nicely, I think, because, you know, they're all speaking the same language, almost, if that makes sense. So NVivo is using elements of natural language processing the same way that Otter is. And I think once you're in that mindset of thinking about a transcript as of a bag of words, maybe, and thinking about word frequencies and stuff like that, then it makes sense throughout the whole process, because that's what NVivo does as well. It will show you word clouds and stuff like that. So yes, you know, it works absolutely perfectly with qualitative analysis tools.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. The next question is whether you can sort of input a video or audio from the past, and whether there is any limitation to the input as far as the data size is concerned.
Yeah, you can input video and audio. You can do it both ways. So you can live transcribe and you can input pre-recorded audio and video. There are limits to data size. So I tried to transcribe a conference that we put on a few weeks ago. The video was way too large for that, and so was the audio. So what I'm having to do is get my colleague to break it down into smaller chunks per session in the conference, and then I'll transcribe each of them individually. So far, I've kind of transcribed anything up to maybe 3 hours, and I haven't really tried to do anything more than that other than this conference. So yes, there are limits, but yes, you can input anything that's pre-recorded really nicely.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. The next question is really about what does the free basic package cover, whether all the functions that you described are included or whether there are any limitations.
Yeah, there are limitations to how much you can store. So you don't get some of the features like speaker assignment. I don't think you get a speaker, how long they've been speaking for, sorry, when you've got the percentage of time they've been speaking for. You don't get stuff like that. You get limits on the amount of words that you can teach it. So when I was talking about abbreviations and teaching it certain words and phrases that might be quite specialist, you get limitations on that. And I think you can store, I can't actually remember, it will say on the website, but you have a maximum number of minutes that you can store within the platform before you'll have to delete something. So you do get quite a lot with the free, I think. You know, it was absolutely fine for me, but now I've been using it for, you know, a good year or two now. It does make sense to pay that few extra pounds for me every month to do it. But yeah, I do like their free option. I think it's very good to have that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Just to answer, I mean, there are several people who were interested whether it would be possible to actually get access to the slides. I mean, as this is a recorded session, the CCRI then put the recording on YouTube, and we usually share the slides on a share slide. So there'll definitely be another possibility for all of you to get access to the presentation. So yes, so I think that's about it. As far as the question goes, I don't know whether, oh, there isn't one more. So there is a questions. I always use Dragon to transcribe interviews using the parroting technique, where I listen to the interview and record myself reading back the interview content and then transcribe that audio file rather than the interview. I've always found this provides really in-depth familiarity with data. What have your experience been of the level of familiarity as far as Otter AI?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I get my familiarity with the data by editing it and listening it again while I'm editing it. And what I like about that is I'm not concentrating on either speaking or typing too much. I'm just listening and I'm editing and I'm actively making comments about what I think is interesting or what are potential themes coming out. So through that process, you can get really familiar with the data. But what I quite like about doing something, you know, like a live transcription or something like that, is because you have the flexibility. You know, if you want to listen to it again and again, you can. If you want to not listen to it again and again, if it's, you know, if that's not the purpose of what you're doing, you don't have to. You know, you've already got the transcript there and you've got a quick summary. So I just really like that flexibility, and I can have, you know, the agency as a researcher to justify, obviously, you know, you've got to justify those choices, but you do get that bit of freedom to make the software work for you. So I'm sure you can do that with Dragon as well.
Mm-hmm. There is also a question. I'd like to hear more about how Otter AI provides punctuation.
Yeah, that I was going to mention it because I guess, you know, in some interview situations, it's important to say if a participant is laughing or crying or whatever, and to note emotions. It doesn't really do open and close brackets from my experience. So it just tends to be kind of commas and full stops and that kind of thing. I add them when I'm editing. You know, if I want to put something in brackets, or if I want to just put in brackets if it's important to say that they were laughing, then I will do that. So it tends to just be really good, I think, with punctuation. But sometimes, as I said, you know, if somebody pauses, it will put a full stop in there by accident, and then it will capitalize a letter that shouldn't have been capitalized. But if you use it enough, you will pick up these things a lot easier. So it is a bit of a learning process. So I'm not sure if that answered the question. Like, yeah, it's fine with punctuation, but you do need to add bits if it's relevant for you. So, you know, in some situations you might not need to put brackets, laughter, or mumbled or incoherent or something like that. In other situations you will, which kind of comes back to, you know, I like having the freedom to kind of, in the flexibility to be able to choose what's appropriate in what situations.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Caitlin. I think that's it as far. No, we have one more question now. Have you encountered resistance to your use of automatic transcription from your university? I have appealed against policies that seem to be based on the assumption that the researcher was being lazy. Also, I think it's worth highlighting that the audio transcription is a useful tool for inclusive research and can be useful for researchers within specific, with specific impairments.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just to kind of pick up on that last point in Amy's comment, with the we ran a conference a few weeks ago and we actually offered subscription to Otter AI as part of the digital inclusivity of the event, and kind of piloted that. And we didn't actually have anyone request it, but we said, you know, we have a budget, and if you need anything like an automated transcriber, because the feature on Zoom, which is actually Otter AI as well, but for some reason I find it doesn't work that well. If they wanted a personal app version, then they could. So yes, it can be really good for enhancing accessibility. In terms of resistance from the university, no, not from the ethics board. That was fine. Maybe from other researchers. I think, I'm not sure if lazy is the right way to put it, because it is, you know, like it or not, this is the future of working, absolutely. You know, it's the way that organizations analyze and, you know, just think about marketing, for example. What they do is instantly, very, very quickly, can analyze vast amount of data about people and then develop targeted advertisements. Same within health, you know, natural language processing and artificial intelligence is absolutely booming in the health sector and used for so many different areas. So, you know, in research, perhaps there's a little bit more resistance because people do quite like to dig their heels in and say, you know, well, I've always done this and it works really well, why shouldn't you? And I think, you know, that comes back to, it's not a replacement, it's a, you know, it's augmenting what you're already doing. So you don't have to make that huge jump and never manually transcribe something ever again. And I don't think it's lazy, I think it's smart using it perhaps, because it, you know, it does save a lot of time. And I think as long as you use it for the right reasons and are thoughtful about it and careful about it and think about the implications of using it, then I think that it's fine. So yes, that's what I'd say if there was resistance about it. I think it's quite a smart move to kind of, you know, accept that actually there will be things, more prevalence of smart literature reviews, for example, where you can use something called topic modeling, which is another variation of natural language processing, to automatically generate topics within maybe 500 research papers very quickly. You can draw out themes within those research papers. Like, how useful is that? There was a tweet the other day and there were loads of, somebody shared a load of AI-based research tools. And there's one where you can click on or type in a research paper that you are interested in, and then it will automatically show you loads of other research papers that are related to it and how. So it will have little lines like drawing, and it will visualize it in a graph. So it's like all of these little like smart tools, I think, that you can use to enhance your, you know, day-to-day operations as a worker or researcher. I just think that they're really interesting and exciting. But yes, but that's my opinion, and I, you know, read privacy notices in my spare time.
Well, thank you very much. I think that's the end of the questions, and I'm also aware of the time. As far as the YouTube link, unfortunately, we can't share it right now because it's a colleague of ours that will actually upload it on the YouTube. But if you follow the CCRI website, there'll definitely be information how you can access it. Yeah, just please sort of keep an eye on the CCRI website. Thank you very much, and back to you, Julie.
Are we concluding there?
Yes, we
are. Yeah, okay. Thanks everybody for coming, and fantastic job. Thanks, Caitlin.
Thank you.
And just as a reminder, our next seminar will be about nature-based solutions on the 8th of July. So take a look at the website and join up for that. Thanks again.